It was a huge break for your man LeBron. He was nearing the end of his 17th year. He'd been on a great run right up to the edge of the quarantine and the pandemic. And then he got almost 5 months off to heal up, rest up, and revitalize.
Let me ask you this. From what you saw leading up to the pandemic, did it look like he was slowing down or picking up steam?
All right, man. It's crazy that the bubble is now 4 years old, and looking back on it is actually pretty comical. Even looking at the 2021 season could be funny because of all the restrictions they had and how empty the arenas were. I went to a few games, so I remember. But that 2020 postseason run was obviously different. The fans were virtually placed on a screen with delayed reactions to what actually happened. It was the craziest thing ever. Home court advantage was literally taken away from anybody that earned it, and it was clear looking back on it, some teams were way more focused than others. But now that it's been 4 years, I want to look at some of the main participants, teams, and players and how exactly the bubble really aged 4 years later. Really quickly, if you guys enjoyed the content, make sure you turn on post notifications, like, comment, subscribe, all that great stuff. As the season approaches, I want to give you guys more content, so make sure you do all that stuff for your boy.
The one thing that I know for sure, that I've been a part of two teams that's won the two hardest championships in NBA league history. The 2016 Cavs coming back from 3-1 versus 73-9 team, being down 3-1 versus one of the best teams that ever been assembled.
Two-time MVP.
Two-time MVP. And then what we went through in the bubble.
In 2020, the Lakers, as we know, they won the championship. And that championship does have an asterisk for a lot of people. Now, for me, I swear, if it wasn't LeBron, it wouldn't have as big of a mark as it does. But that's simply what comes with being in the GOAT debate and constantly being compared to Jordan. That's just what happens. Nevertheless, what makes that championship stand tall for the Lakers, regardless of how fake you ultimately think it was, is what they did great in the regular season prior to COVID and the bubble even being a thing, and how seamlessly it translated to the bubble. That offseason, they got Dwight Howard, JaVale McGee, and obviously the biggest offseason addition, Anthony Davis, and they completely embraced being this big bully ball team, even allowing LeBron to run point for the first time ever. Frank Vogel always placed a heavy emphasis on his team's defenses, and they had one of the best defenses that year. And offensively, they had a very reliable style that drove the ball, relied heavily on their bread and butter Anthony Davis and LeBron in the pick and roll, and everybody else played beautifully off those two. Most importantly, that team secured the glass. In the regular season, they were one of the best rebounding teams all year with all the size they added. In the playoffs, they had the best rebound differential of anybody. That's pivotal for any championship team historically. And say what you want about that Lakers team, what they did well and how they won in the regular season is exactly how they won in the bubble. In the playoffs, LeBron and the Lakers, they basically steamed and crushed the entire Western Conference. In the regular season, they did the exact same thing. In the playoffs / bubble that year, they lost 4 of their 16 games against the big bad Western Conference. In the regular season that year, they only lost 10 games against the big bad West, and they had the best overall record in the West, and they had the best record against the West. So it was not like they was doing anything abnormal. It just translated seamlessly. They were simply the more driven team in that moment, and obviously it paid off. LeBron got his 4th championship. Now afterwards, and how exactly their team aged is a completely different story, and it has nothing to do with the bubble specifically. I can't ever call the 2020 bubble Lakers frauds because fresh off the shortest break from any champion in any major league sport ever, they started exactly how they left. The following season, Anthony Davis got hurt 27 games into that already shortened season, and at the time he got hurt, the Lakers were 21-6, dominating the league. LeBron was arguably first in MVP voting, and their season really fell apart directly after LeBron and Anthony Davis' bodies broke down. That year, the Lakers, and LeBron specifically, he lost in the first round for the first time in his career ever. And that offseason, they simply made arguably the silliest trade in NBA history. Not Russ's fault, and I always say that because he didn't trade for himself, but they traded a championship core and recipe for Russell Westbrook, who never fit. And to me, that wasted like a year and a half of LeBron's prime. Since losing Russ, the Lakers have the 5th best record in the stacked Western Conference, and they made the conference finals. But to me, it was always an extremely hyperbolic move to blow up a championship core simply off an injury-riddled year, off a shortened summer. It just never made sense. I want to talk about the team that, to me, if anything, makes the Lakers championship run look a little bit more valid, the Clippers. Now, most people that have questions about the legitimacy of that championship run typically bring up the Clippers and how they avoided their biggest threat. It's really no question that the Clippers, they were the team that suffered from the bubble conditions the most. They wanted out. Reportedly, they weren't comfortable. Paul George complained about it, Lou Wood, whatever. They were the team that weren't the most comfortable. But even since, respectfully, the Clippers have proven no matter what exactly the conditions are, the Clippers are always going to Clipper. I'm not going to get too deep into it because I literally just dropped a video about Kawhi and it kind of breaks down exactly that. But in the bubble, the Clippers blew a 3-1 lead after really struggling with Dallas. And even the following season, they struggled even more with Dallas in 7 games that time, and Kawhi's injuries, it derailed any chance they ever had at winning. Doc Rivers proved it wasn't just the bubble. He's a generational choker, pause, in general. And since then, he's on his 3rd team. Supposedly, the biggest problem with that Clippers experiment was, okay, they never really had a point guard. Patrick Beverley wasn't really a point guard, and neither was Lou Williams. And since they've had John Wall, Russell Westbrook, and James Harden out of their primes, yes, I understand. But even with all the roster turnover and the changes and the personnel changes and the multiple different coaches, all they really have to show for the highest payroll in the league for like the last 2-3 years is a Kawhi-less conference finals appearance. And now the whole experiment is completely blown up. Paul George is in Philly. So no, it wasn't the conditions. Those were actually the prime conditions for their best player's body. It's just the Clippers, well, they're always going to be the Clippers. Now, the team that really helped the Lakers' case in proving how valid that championship was to me was actually the team they beat, the Miami Heat. It was easy to think, well, maybe it was a little bit fluky the following season after the bubble because Miami, they got swept in the first round after Jimmy Butler said he was stupidly locked in, and it just looked bad. The season directly after the bubble, I can't lie, it did make the bubble look fraudulent because both the teams that made the finals, they were gone in the first round the following season. That was the first time that happened since like 07 and only like the 3rd time ever. So of course, it did look bad and the fluky comments did look valid. But since it has aged gracefully for Miami, and obviously that does help the Lakers. First of all, since the bubble, the Miami Heat, they're only behind Boston in total playoff wins. Boston, they're the only team to go to multiple finals in that little span. Also, that bubble run, it was kind of the year of Jimmy Butler and what he was ultimately doing, carrying that Miami 5th seed to the finals. Again, it could have been perceived as fluky because they did beat Milwaukee in the 2nd round, and Milwaukee did have home court that season with the best record in the East. But since then, Jimmy proved it wasn't at all. We obviously know the Jimmy Butler thing wasn't fluky because, well, he did it again. And he has the most 40-point games since he joined Miami, and that conference finals was Boston against Miami. And since then, well, they've been to 2 more conference finals in which they both went to 7 games and they split. Obviously, that wasn't fake. And Miami, they did the bubble the biggest favor and damn near duplicated what they did in 2020 and 2023. Just a year ago, they beat and stunned the first seeded Milwaukee Bucks and Giannis. And yes, you can say Giannis was hurt in 2023, but he was also hurt in 2020. The team was obviously different and a lot more mature, but in the conference finals, they beat Boston just like they did in 2020. And if it weren't for Jokic, they could have met the Lakers again. And speaking of Jokic and the Denver Nuggets, the bubble for him, that also aged very well, but not initially. To me, what's making the bubble look more and more valid is when you look at the regular season that year prior to the bubble even being a thing and what ultimately happened after it concluded. That year, we all focused on the Clippers and the Lakers, and understandably so. They got megastars to join their franchises. But the 3rd seed that year was the Denver Nuggets. Even the year before, it may have been a slow climb, but Denver, they were 1 game away from the conference finals, and Jokic wasn't even Jokic yet, and MPJ was a rookie. That season of the bubble was really the last year of Jokic being just a star, since now he's become an undisputed superstar and to me the best player on the planet. The following 2 seasons after directly making the conference finals in that bubble run, Denver lost their 2nd and 3rd best players for consecutive years. Of course, that's going to hurt their playoff outcome. Meanwhile, even through that, Jokic became Jokic, winning back-to-back MVPs. But of course, without the right personnel, you're not going to win big in the playoffs. Unfortunately, when you're putting up big numbers and you're winning MVPs, even if it's not your fault, even if it's not fair, if you don't win or if it doesn't translate into playoffs with wins, it comes with unfair scrutiny sometimes. And that's exactly what happened to Jokic.
So listen, he played well last night. He did what I had asked him to do, of course, until the end when Steph blew by him and then Draymond stole his cookies and the game was over and their season's over and the idea of him being a top 5 player in this league, hopefully, mercifully, is over. But I'm not going to kill him. Listen, it is what it is. He's a really, really good player that calculators have wildly overrated, and the playoffs will continue to show us that, Broussard.
In Nikola Jokic's back-to-back MVP years, a lot of people begin to call him a fraud. And if you actually look at it, amongst stars, in that little window, he did have one of the lowest win percentages in the playoffs amongst stars. So yeah, initially it did look bad, and even historically speaking, it wasn't the best look for a back-to-back MVP to lose in the fashion in which he was losing, but we all knew subconsciously, you really can't blame him. Directly after he got his guys back healthy, Jamal Murray and MPJ, and they added some new pieces, KCP, Bruce Brown, Aaron Gordon. Denver had the best record in the West, Denver won the NBA championship, and Nikola Jokic had one of the craziest championship runs we've ever seen. Also, I'll be remiss if I didn't say this. Jamal Murray, he dominated the bubble, and it did look fluky at times, specifically against the Jazz and Donovan Mitchell, like they were on a different level. Well, his very next playoff appearance was his championship run, and his numbers are very comparable. So no, it wasn't fluky, that's simply what he does. Now, if there were any team that debunked the bubble and kind of made the bubble look a little fraudulent, I mean, you could say the Milwaukee Bucks. That season, that regular season, they did earn home court advantage in which they never had, and Giannis did win his back-to-back MVP and a DPOY. Giannis even said, under normal circumstances, he doesn't really feel like it would have went that way, and Miami was built for the bubble. And the following season, Milwaukee did avenge it by sweeping Miami. But respectfully to the great Giannis, I think that was more so of a problem that he specifically had to work through on the court and his team had to work through personnel-wise. Miami, very similar to what Toronto did the year prior when Giannis won the MVP and Milwaukee had the first seed again. They built that wall on him and forced him to operate in the half court and slowed the game and really their whole offense down. At that time, they didn't have that steady vet point guard Jrue Holiday. They had Eric Bledsoe, so they relied heavily on Giannis driving and opening up everything for everyone. Look at Giannis's last 4 games against Toronto when they went up 2-0 and lost those last 4 games in the conference finals, and look at his numbers against Miami. They were very comparable. So to me, it was more so a Giannis personnel problem that they had to work through, and they ultimately did. And lastly, Russ and James Harden, who at that time, they were star teammates in Houston. This felt like both of their last seasons in their primes, and since they both come down kinda hard. For Russ, it was actually the last time he made it out the first round and even made an all-star team. And since he's been on 4 teams as a former MVP. And for Harden, I'll give him credit because he did change and pivoted his play style to suit his future teams with more stars, and he did it very well. But that last year in Houston specifically, that capped off one of the craziest 3-year scoring runs that we've ever seen. Get this, in those last 3 years in Houston, James Harden had more 40-point games than the following 3 players behind him combined. That was pretty much the end of that. And afterwards, he pivoted to his point guard bag, which again, I respect. In 2023, we had the exact same finals that we actually had in the bubble. And to me, 4 years later, the bubble has really aged well. If you guys like this video, don't just leave the video, bro. Leave a like, comment what you feel about the bubble 4 years later. How do you think it's translated? I think it did. I mean, it translated very well. It's been backened up by the seasons that follow to me. Follow my social media sites, turn on post notifications, do all that great stuff, guys. And until next time, as always, stay tuned.